We saw Miles go nuclear at the Garden. It was awesome. 38 points, 22 points in the first quarter. So really got them off and rolling. I think Terry Rozier had a nice stretch in the middle of that game, but it was really Miles Bridges who had a career day and at least got some attention back to possibly getting in a legit all-star conversation. Already a top 10 vote getter in the front court, but maybe performing on that stage, right? A game where there weren't too many NBA games happening at that point. He demanded your attention. Was really awesome to see. Wes, what were some of the notes you took down when you got to see Miles Bridges perform the way he did up in New York City?
Well, the thing I like about Miles a lot is that I heard him say a couple games back how I forgot which game it was, and he told Ashley at halftime that the team had taken things personally, and he had taken things personally. And so that's the thing I like about Miles is that you really get the gist from him that the losses really hurt him. He's really disappointed by them. Not that it doesn't other players, but I say all that to say you could see that in his performance in New York. You could tell that he was probably the most angry about what had happened against Orlando. That was a game that, of course, it's tough to beat a team 3 times in a row, but they really should have beaten that Orlando team. The Hornets were red hot. They're a better team than Orlando. Let's face it, Orlando has 7 wins coming into that game. So you could tell just coming out in that New York game that he really wanted to set the tone, especially with no LaMelo, and that Miles was hot. He was steaming about what had happened the game before, because I know these guys like to get on winning streaks. They don't want something to break it up. And for a team like Orlando to be the team to do that, it was very disappointing. And so I read their post-game comments after the Orlando game, and they talked about how basically they said they didn't take Orlando serious. And Miles said specifically that they get up easily for the Sixers, for the Bucks, but they don't get up like they need to for teams like the Magic. So you could tell that he was steaming. And it came out in a 22-point first quarter. We were playing over and under, my girl and I, on how many points he would finish with. I thought he would go around 43. But he got 38, which was more than enough because, you get off to 22 in the Garden, the nostalgia. You like, man, what am I about to be in for? And just the shots that he was hitting. But the thing I loved about it was just the aggression. That's the thing I took notes about the most from his performance was just the aggression, how he said, today, fellas, we're not going to come out and get off to a slow start. We're going to come out here and establish ourselves early, let New York know that we're here to play some basketball. There's not going to be 10, 12, 15 points down early and digging ourselves out of a hole. And so he came to play. I don't think it had anything to do with the Garden. I don't think it had anything to do with it being the Knicks. I think it was just straight Miles saying, I'm mad about what happened last game. I'm pissed off that we lost, and I'm going to come out here and set this off, and y'all follow me.
So, I mean, Wes, do you think he's a lock for most improved player? And a question on top of that, do you think he's a lock for most improved player? And do you think he's a lock to secure a max contract in the offseason?
I definitely think he's a lock to get a max contract. The market is going to dictate that. I mean, he's averaging around 19, 8 boards. So not necessarily superstar numbers to get that max contract, but he's shown you flashes and he's shown dependability this year. So I think for sure the market is going to dictate that he gets that max contract for sure. And I think he's deserving. I'm not going to say that. I think he's deserving. And in the first part you said, do I think he's a lock for most improved player? Yeah, I mean, I don't see many guys that have improved as much as he has. And I was just saying the other day, just kind of in also to speak of, I remember when the Hornets drafted him, and not that I was down on him, but just from what I saw at Michigan State, he looked like he was going to be mostly a power player. Wasn't sure if the jump shot was going to develop. And I remember going to the games last season with my son and just watching the acrobatic finishes at the rim and him shooting the 3. And I said, man, Miles has really worked on his game and he's becoming a complete player. And now you see this year that even more of the work that he's put in is showing. So I don't see many players across the league that have improved as much as he has. So to answer your question, I say yes and yes.
Yeah, Walker was down on him.
Oh, for sure. Well, where were you? How happy were you about Miles Bridges?
I was ecstatic. I saw exactly what was coming. I knew that he was going to build into this player, of course.
Yes, of course you did.
From
Everybody
Flint.
did. Oh, I definitely was down on Miles Bridges, wasn't a fan. And the thing is, man, like you just watch how much he grew even after just a bad second year, because I think if you were to try to gauge expectations at the end of each of his seasons, rookie year, I thought maybe a tick above expectations. Like, okay, did a few things that I didn't expect, really like what he got you. And then second year was pretty bad. I mean, shooting percentages weren't good. Defensively, had a ton of lapses. I just thought he was flat out a bad player his second season. And then his third year, he blossoms into this player that isn't asked to do a whole lot more. Second half, he steps up in the absence of Gordon Hayward, and I think that's the thing I wanted to touch on most, Wes, when you brought up, especially with no LaMelo. Miles is a guy you're starting to be able to depend on. I mean, every single time somebody's out and Miles has it within him to say, yeah, I'm going to take over this one, like, okay, he's going to deliver. And I think that's what's so fun to watch about Miles' maturity. And even James Borrego spent most of his post-game availability talking about Miles after that New York contest, about how he's able to put the ball on the deck a lot more. He's playmaking a lot more, where his passing was on full display in that game against the Knicks too. Like, you see him take more responsibility, become a true threat that can have the offense run through him. And I think that's what's really interesting to see, how he's developed into a really, really fun basketball player. Let's talk about somebody else that's been very good for them. You know, Miles Bridges, I think, is a lock for most improved player. Kelly Oubre also is in the conversation to get sixth man of the year. Injury certainly doesn't help. Tyler Hero having the kind of cachet he brings, still probably going to win that. But I think you've been able to see here, Wes, the offensively not scoring as many points, Kelly Oubre not being in the game. I don't think that's a coincidence. He's been somebody that's been able to fill it up once he comes off the bench. And I think because of his absence, they've been hurting a little more offensively. How badly do you think they need Kelly back? Maybe getting him tonight against the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can get one of your best players, because he has been that this year. He's been one of the Hornets' best players, and there's no denying it. He's averaging 16 points on the season and still the only player, or one of the few players in the NBA to have a 35-point game on the bench, coming off the bench, and as a starter. So this guy is instant offense. If you want to go back old school to microwave like Vinnie Johnson, that's what Kelly Oubre is, man. He comes off the bench and he is going to get buckets. And like I said, you couldn't find a better fit for a team than he's been with the Hornets. I mean, this is a guy that's going to come in. He's going to find the open spots on the court. And when you get it to him, you can pretty much mark it down and start running the other way to play defense. When he puts it up, it's going to go down. So anytime you can get a guy back like that, and I think he is one of the guys that makes the Hornets so potent, because I feel like, or potent because he's been pretty consistent this season too. Like, he doesn't have a lot of bad games on his resume. Most nights he comes in and is fairly productive once he steps into the lineup. So he's just one of the most dangerous Hornets. So you have to, welcome him back. The Hornets and the Raptors are the only two teams with 5 guys averaging 15 or more, and he's one of them. So you need one of your pieces back, just like Voltron. You need one of your parts. I guess he might be the arm, since he can shoot. So you need Kelly back in there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the success of the Kelly Oubre acquisition, paired with the improvements that we've seen from PJ Washington's defense and the improvements, the ascension, the leap that Miles Bridges is taking, all of that has combined to almost make them a little too potent offensively, in that you now have a glut of options that you can look to. With you add in Gordon Hayward, and Terry has certainly shown an amazing ability to score late buckets. So you've got a lot of pieces there. It honestly, for me, I think it opens up this necessity to make a deal at the trade deadline, to go back to our discussion in the first segment, because I think you have so many options offensively, you can afford to trade some of that offense for defense. And you may need to trade some of that offense for defense, so that you can allow the pieces that you do see yourself moving forward with, if that's Miles Bridges, if that's Gordon Hayward, if that's Terry Rozier, whatever those pieces are that you want to pair with LaMelo Ball moving forward, you need to give them room to grow. I do a little, I don't know if you know this, but I have a little bit of a green thumb. I've been doing a little bit of gardening. Mm-hmm. And one of the keys to gardening is that you have to plant things a certain distance. You have to give them distance so that they have room to take root and grow. And I think that's Miles Bridges. And what I'm saying is, I'm an amazing gardener.
Yeah, that's what we wanted to take away from this podcast first and foremost. The only thing I would say
Do you
about
wear a
all
hat
of
and
that.
goggles out there? That's important. I had a buddy of mine have an eye injury, man. You got to have your stuff on. You can't be out there in the yard playing around.
No,
It's
you
true.
can't. No, I appreciate that, Doug, and I apprate that, Wes. Thank you. I'm going to be able to guard
Safety
and
first.
have my safety.
Don't want
along
to
with me.
take a piece of kale to the eye.
The only thing I would say about that is you talk about maybe sacrificing offense for defense. Like the most tradable person we've talked about is PJ Washington. That's kind of doing the opposite. You're trading defense for maybe more defense, right? Like you're not. So does that mean you're kind of in favor of moving a Kelly Oubre? I know you've talked about him being untradeable. Where does the offense go? Like, who is the offensive piece that has to be moved out?
Well, we've heard the Pacers were interested in possibly acquiring Gordon Hayward if that was a maneuver. I think I'd be less inclined, and this is just me personally. I mean, I would be less inclined to see certified gamer Terry Rozier leave the Charlotte Hornets because he's just been impacting individual games, so incredibly that I would hate to see him leave. And he's been such a force to bring this team together. I think that would be something you're missing as well. But I just think you have to do something. That's my whole. If I could hang a banner, if I could rent an airplane and fly a banner,
you're poking somebody.
I would say do something.
Mm-hmm.
So, Doug, what's your end game with making that move? Do you want to win a playoff series this year or next year? Or are you looking at possibly going to Eastern Conference Finals? Like, that's my thing with the Hornets making the deal. I know as far as salary wise, they got to make some moves as well. But like, what do you feel like is the end game? Like, what do you feel like another piece will get us to?
Long-time listeners of this podcast will know that I've always preached patience and preached having a strategy that makes sense in the short term and the long term. But then this thing happened. They got lucky in the draft and acquired LaMelo Ball. And LaMelo is only getting better, and the clock is going tick, 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 tick. And so, yes, I think the Hornets have an obligation to accelerate the window of competing in the playoffs. And they have enough pieces to do it. It's now just about acquiring the right pieces to compete in the playoffs. And I'm not sure they have those pieces on the roster right now.
Well, and you talk about preaching patience. I mean, they have. Like Mitch Kupchak has not jumped the gun on anything. And I'm totally with you. You just don't want to fall asleep while waiting. And that's the problem. It's, are you not jumping on this opportunity because patience has worked for you so far? At some point, it seems like you got to make a move. And this is what we talked about with the Boston Celtics. Well, we almost traded for him. It was so close. We almost traded for him until you don't have a championship, you don't have an Eastern, you don't get to the NBA Finals at all to show for it, right? Like we're on a different tier below that right now. But at this point, I think it was fine to come out with a playoff mandate. For me, I want to be competitive in the postseason this year. If you're asking me what I want more than anything, I don't need a playoff series win. I want to feel like we could, though. I want to be.
I want to feel the feeling.
I want to be competitive in the first round of the playoffs, and if we lose, then hey, we come in with some hope in the offseason.
That's what 16 felt like. That's what 2016 felt like.
Except you have younger players here. This is going to be more sustainable. That's what I would want.
I think if they get to 6 or 7, which I think they're more than capable, and really with all the home games they have left and the way that they play at home, they could maybe even dare to say get to 5 or 6. If you get to 5 or 6, I think that's well ahead of what people, because I know preseason publications had the Hornets like still kind of out on the outside looking in. So if you get to 5, 6, 7, I think you're a little bit ahead of the curve, and LaMelo Ball has to look and kind of like what he sees. And then I think in the off season, maybe you look and say, okay, what can we do to get to the next level? But I think right now, unless it's just something earth-shattering me personally, I think they should stick with it. Yeah, because
and you know what? And they can maybe be competitive with just the roster they have now. I think they could. And so if that happens, then that's fine. And then the offseason, they can start to explore that a little more. You brought up the standings. I want to do a standings check coming up next in the last segment of the Locked On Hornets podcast. Do want to make a point to mention Bet Online. If you want to bet on where these teams might finish at the end of the season, Bet Online is the place to go. They'd like to wish you a happy new betting year as they continue the march to the playoffs. They're right in the thick of it with the NFL. It remains the #1 spot for all the best sports wagering action for 2022. It's a new year, so you get a new updated desktop and mobile website, so you can sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use the promo code LOCKEDON to get started. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino game. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. Bet Online is the fastest and the easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. Bet Online, where the games start. Standings check, Boston Celtics game, Wes Bryant show and tell. It's coming up in the third segment of the Locked On Hornets podcast.